God is good, isn't He? Oh, I'll tell you what. Keep your eye on the prize, as you see, is the title of the sermon. But so how can a person become the best at what they do? Like if you're a baseball pitcher, how do you win the Cy Young Award? I mean, you throw a lot of pitches, you practice, you hone your skills, you work on your weaknesses, you have some coach coaching you, trying to get you down to the best, to become the best. If you're a football player, say you're a quarterback and you want to become the MVP of the NFL, how do you get that done? One decision at a time, countless hours and days practicing, poring over film, so much time that normally a lot of people would be spent home relaxing, doing other things. You're working on your craft. If you're a journalist, how do you win a Pulitzer Prize? You're just dogged, determined to work on your writing skills and your investigative skills, and once again, you put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you have to put in something over the top in order to win a Pulitzer Prize. If you're a gymnast and you're going to win a gold medal at the Olympics, it takes a lot of countless little decisions to enable you to be able to do so. Just like if you're a cyclist and you're going to win the Tour de France. Each and every one of these examples I gave you, and there are countless others, the way you become the best at what you do is you make a lot of little decisions that add up to you achieving your goal. Some of these choices are sacrificial. Like a football player might give up eating, like Tom Brady, he gave up eating a lot of junk food that we like to eat and enjoy. I know I do. And he had a very regimented, menu that he ate from. The thing is, how and why are they able to make so many sacrifices? Sometimes away from home, sometimes away from family. How and why are they able to do so? It's because they keep their eye on the prize. They keep focus on what they want to accomplish in life. So I come to the question, what should we as Christians most greatly desire? I hope that at the top of everyone's list is at the end of life that you desire to hear God say, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." And in this life, I hope your desire is to be blessed by God in all that you do, even if things aren't going the way that you want. So how do we as Christians receive a blessing from God? And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, because it's what this passage talks about. So how does a Christian receive a blessing from God? Well, it isn't easy. Not always. Sometimes it requires sacrifice and choices that we would rather not make. Now, as we get ready to look in this, we're going to go to 1 Peter once again, chapter 3, beginning at verse 8. And we're going to go through verse 12. But the context, once again, go back, and the setting of 1 Peter is written in a time when the church was under attack. The church found things very difficult. They were under attack for many different ways. It is believed that when Peter wrote this, he was probably in Rome, and it was real close to the time that Emperor Nero was getting ready to come in and try to wipe out Christians. Matter of fact, Nero found, as we know, he's kind of on the crazy side. It is widely believed that he had Rome burnt down so he could have it rebuilt in his image, and he was able to blame it on the Christians and kill many of them in order to get what he wanted. So there's a time of persecution. And so Peter wrote this letter to encourage believers who were facing difficult trials. And of course, they faced trials from many different aspects, many different portions of society. From the Romans, they were not well thought of because they refused to worship Caesar. They refused to bow down to him as a god. And so because of that, they were considered outcasts to the Romans. To the Jews, they were under attack because they were considered heretics. And often to their own families, they were ostracized because their own families couldn't understand why they would start believing such crazy nonsense in their minds. They could lose their families, their jobs, everything that supported them before becoming a Christian. They could lose it all, but just by becoming a believer. And yet they were human. They were no different from us in that when we face opposition, our natural reaction is one of self-defense. I know when I feel like I'm under attack, I want to defend myself immediately, and sometimes and usually that causes more problems than good. For these last few weeks, we have seen Peter write about how believers needed to focus on relationships. A few weeks ago, Jim talked about how they were supposed to submit to earthly authorities. And then I talked about how Peter said we were supposed to, as slaves at that time, were supposed to submit to their masters, even if their masters were evil. And then last week, Jim talked about how wives were supposed to submit to husbands and how husbands were to treat their wives with a great understanding, realizing that she is a fellow heir. In each case, the teaching would have challenged what was considered to be normal at the time. So let's begin today's with a reading of 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Let's stand out of respect for God's word. I'm actually using the New Living Translation today. Finally, all of you should be of one mind. Sympathize with each other. Love each other as brothers and sisters. Be tender-hearted and keep a humble attitude. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. That is what God has called you to do. And He will grant you His blessing. For the Scriptures say, if you want to enjoy life and see many happy days, keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn away from evil and do good. Search for peace and work to maintain it. The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right, and His ears are open to their prayers. But the Lord turns His face against those who do evil. Please be seated. Now, almost every commentator say verse 8 is done with believers living with other believers in the church. And verse 9 is believers dealing with people who are not in the church, who are unbelievers. And so that's how I'm going to break it down. And so point 1 is dealing with Christians. Verse 8 basically commands everyone to get along as a church. For anyone who is a member, has been a member of a church for any length of time, knows that sometimes there are problems within the body. Not everybody's going to be fond of us. Not everybody's going to like everything that we do. And as much as I like to think of myself as being a good boy that everybody kind of likes, that's not always true. Many times, the reason for this is we come from different backgrounds and see things from different perspectives. This verse begins with, be of one mind, or as the New American Standard says, be harmonious. And I like that word because I'm going to use it. The command is simple. They were to share a commitment to the truth of the gospel, which is that Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God, came down to earth and lived a life, the perfect life before God, and He gave His life as a sacrifice to pay the price for our sin. That is the truth that they were to be focused on. That is the truth that was supposed to unite everybody in there. Now, there are many different facets to that belief. There are many different aspects that bring fullness to the belief. But at the same time, it is the one thing that should bring us to harmony within the church, especially when we come from different backgrounds. Now, while there were many different types of Christians that Peter was writing to, people from all over the world, as it talked about, people who were scattered abroad, Peter knew that harmony would be possible as long as they fought together for the faith. Who here likes good harmony when we're singing, when you're hearing singing, right? I love the harmony of the praise team. I love the fullness to the sound, and I like how it sings. I love listening to a good choir. Then you have 4 parts and more type, and how sometimes they're singing at different parts and they bring it together. What does it take to have harmony? Now, Steve would probably give a better definition of this, but this is what I said. It takes people singing different parts, but working together to sing the same song. Is that accurate? There you go. Isn't that what harmony in a church should be like? Just as different notes form chords to make beautiful harmonies, different people can live and work together for God as long as we are working toward the same goal. The gospel of Jesus needs to be our focus. Anything else will lead to division. It's like listening to an orchestra warming up. Who likes listening to that? Oh my goodness, the chaos. And just, when you have 30 different violins and they're all warming up, it doesn't sound very good, does it? Joe, does it sound good? Yeah, not so much. So that's truth there. But when they're all playing together the same song and they're playing different parts, it's beautiful. Unless somebody's off. And see, that's just it. It can take just one person in the church to break the beautiful harmony of a church. Sometimes the reason people don't get along it's because of simple cultural misunderstandings. There were 2 weeks I went to Albania when I was living in Canada. And the missionary there, his name was Stephen. Oh, good grief. What was his last? I can't remember his last name right now. It was I had it earlier, but sorry, gone. But anyway, he prepared us during this 2 weeks. He says, when they say goodbye, they're going to say goodbye the Albanian way. And that means, yes, they're going to kiss. So they said, be prepared. Just stand there and take it, basically. That was his advice. And so we did. Some places I read that some places in India, it's not okay to eat with your left hand, which would be a real problem for me since I'm left-handed, and I always eat with my left hand unless you want me eating with my right hand without any utensils in it. And people probably don't appreciate seeing the messy fingers. There's some places I read that in China it's an insult to serve people cold food. They say, you don't care enough to warm it up for me? That's kind of the thought, the mentality. Once again, going back to Albania, if you're going to eat in somebody's home, you can be guaranteed of two things. One, they're going to serve you alcohol. That's just a cultural staple. If for every meal, a little bit. And you had to sip at least a little bit, or it would be considered a huge insult. And the impression you would leave on them would be horrible. And so it would be better just to not go. So those are some things that are just different. And here's the problem. We expect there to be cultural differences when we go to a different country because they grew up a whole different set of standards, a whole different type of history. And so we know things will be different when we go to different countries. And the problem is, in the church, everybody here has been in the United States, most of us, our whole life, or for most of our lives. I know not quite our whole life, but a long time. And so we expect everybody to have the same standards that we have, the same feelings. And one thing I realized real early on in my ministry, as I was trying to work with people who were getting ready to be married, the couple, I would always try to explain to them, you are basically merging one culture with another culture. There may be a lot of similarities, but there are differences, I guarantee you. And your goal is to find out what the differences are, to understand them, and to work out how to live with the differences in your cultures. And I have recently found out that the tone and the volume of my voice when I respond to people's jokes has caused problems. Because some people didn't realize I was joking back with them because I didn't do it with a smile, and they thought I was mad. The truth is, I was just trying to return the joke. I was not mad, but it was caused problems. Now, my wife a long time had told me, said, Dan, tone your voice down, get it down. She warned me many times. I just didn't realize how it was affecting other people. So something I'm going to be working on. I'm an old dog, going to be trying to learn a new trick. But sometimes it's best to try to learn what is wrong and try to correct it, right? See, here's the thing in all this. If we are out of harmony, how do we get back in harmony? And one thing I have learned to try to do is when I'm upset with somebody else who's in the church, first thing I try to do is I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I try to believe that they are a believer who's trying to serve God the best that they know how. I try to also trust that the Holy Spirit is working in their lives to bring about change in their lives. I can't do it. It's not my place to do it. I just have to work and live with them. And that's all I have to worry about. So secondly, then, we need to get to know them. We don't cancel them out. We don't try to avoid them. Maybe we need to go have some meals with them. Maybe we need to do whatever it takes to spend time with them, talk to them, and sometimes it's just a matter of being honest enough to say that what you said there really bothered me. And most of the time you're going to find that, many times I think you'll find that it was a misunderstanding rather than them trying to pull one over on you or harm you in any way. I'm not saying it never happens. I'm saying the majority of the time there's misunderstandings. And we need to pray for them. Not against them, pray for them, that God would bless them, that God would use them, that God would further His kingdom through them. And we always need to keep focused on the truth surrounding the gospel. Instead of being convinced that our way is better than their way, we need to remember that there can be different approaches to accomplishing the same goal. We need to remember that we are all sinners in need of a Savior. Each and every one of us have done things that have dishonored God. Each and every one of us at times will still be doing things that dishonor God. And we need to live life with humility. We are all broken and need to be restored in some way. And nobody has become perfect in this life. I think we need to take the Bill Belichick philosophy to heart for his football team. And that is, and I've heard it several times, you each need to do your own jobs. We all need to do our own job and trust others to do their job. In addition, we need to do it for God's glory, not our own. Peter then also says, that's a long time on just one word, isn't it? Peter also says that we are to be sympathetic, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. These three commands are challenging in application. First, we are also called to be sympathetic, which means literally sharing the same feeling. Who wants to get down with somebody else? I'm talking feeling down. You get around somebody who they're going through life, that things are difficult, things are hard. It's not fun to be around them. But you know what? That is part of being the body of Christ. Sharing their burden, doing the things and listening to them, praying for them, doing what is necessary to support them, being sympathetic. Life for so many people is not what they expected or wanted. They may have suffered loss and their foundation has been shaken. We need to be there for them. Next, we need to love each other as brothers and sisters. We need to show affection within the church just like we're families. Just like Jesus commanded from John chapter 13 where He said, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. You know, He never gave any other way to prove that we're His disciples other than the way that we love others. And then Peter keeps increasing the challenge with our Christian family, that we are to be kind-hearted. And this comes from a Greek word that basically not only does it mean that we need to be aware of other people's needs, but we need to be moved enough to be hurt we need to be moved by their hurt to be willing to find a way to help them. That means it is not enough to simply say, I'll pray for you and go your own way. Sometimes it means you may have to give them money. You may have to help them in some physical way. You may have to do something that's going to put you at odds at discomfort. But isn't that what it takes to bear somebody else's burden? Don't you have to be burdened somewhat yourself if you're going to share their burdens? If we are moved to help, then we are acting in the same manner as God, who saw the plight of humanity destined for hell. His love compelled him to do something to come meet our needs. And if we have forgotten, Paul did write that we should bear one another's burdens. So when we hear such teachings, a part of us asks, I know what I do, how much? How much should I care? Aren't there limits to how much I should care, or how much I should share with somebody financially, how much I should share of my time? We want walls, we want limits, we want to say, I've given enough, I don't need to give any more. And we don't actually say it because we know it would be wrong, but deep down inside we're feeling it. We're like Peter, who asked Jesus, how many times must we forgive? 7 times? He thought he was being generous. Why? Why did he ask that? Because he wanted a limit. But now Peter had learned the lesson to this question of how much. His answer to the question of how much, he says, is as much as you would for family. How much would you do for your children? How much would you do for your parents? How much would you do for those that you really love? The last descriptor in God's family is that we are to be humble in spirit. I agree with the commentator who wrote that humility is arguably the most essential, all-encompassing virtue of the Christian life. The right attitude is the right attitude that will lead us to peace with each other, because it will not allow us to think more highly of ourselves than we ought. We must always remember our humble status before God and our privileged status as His child. We also remember that others in the church have the same standings as we do. We are all together His children who have placed our faith in Him. So whenever we focus on the gospel combined with humility, harmony and peace will be normal for that church, for our church. But when church work becomes about me and my ego and the way I would do it, there's going to be division. So that's how it is to live among other believers. How do we relate to non-Christians, to unbelievers? Remember, the first half of verse 9 says, don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. Evil is from the word kekos, which is used to talk about wickedness or an inner evil. So Peter says that when we are mistreated by someone with a wicked disposition, believers must not retaliate. When they intend to do you harm, we are not to retaliate. That's hard to do. It goes against our natures. Yes, these are very challenging words. And we know that we can't control. We know we can't control how other people treat us. But we know that with God's help, what we are called to do. With God's help, we can have the strength to respond as God wishes. We might ask, why would we? Why should I seek to bless this evil person who has caused me so much pain? The answer is twofold. I think the most important reason is that, one, it pleases God. It pleases God. Plain and simple. And secondly, if you need a different motivation, He promises to bless you if you do. We should avoid the double standard that was shown by the unforgiving. Remember the parable that Jesus gave us in Matthew chapter 18. He talked about a man who owed the king 10,000 talents. And the king said, sell him, sell his family, sell all his possessions, and throw him in jail. What did the man do? He fell down on his knees, on his face before the king, and he pled for his life because he knew there is no way he could repay the amount of money. You realize in 10,000, just one talent was equal to about, I read 20 years of labor. That's that's an enormous amount of money. It's like us owing $20 billion. No way that we pay that, right? And so the king had mercy on him and forgave him. Oh, you just write the check? It's okay. You just write check, yeah. And then go to jail for fraud, right? All right. So the king had mercy upon him and forgave him his debt and let him go on his way. And so what did the servant do? He went out and found a man that owed him 100 denarii, which is equivalent to about 100 days' labor, 1/3 of a year, 3 months, something like that. And he said, I want my money. Pay me now. And when the man could not pay, what did he do? He had the man thrown into jail until he could pay him back. Well, of course, the king found out about it and climbed over his frame and said, I've had mercy on you, should you have not had mercy on your fellow citizen? Jesus' point is that believers have received God's unwavering forgiveness, His mercy and grace. He gave us the one thing that we could never achieve on our own merit. He made us His adopted children. Think about it. You are God's adopted child. What a privileged position. Nothing you did can help you earn that position. God gave it to you through His grace. And we are to give the same grace to other people. Now, I found a video I wanted to show. It was actually a 15-minute video. I cut it down to 2.5. Aren't you glad? But it's a testimony of a father who adopted the man who killed his son. Ike Brown was a police officer who one morning he was up very early getting ready for the day when a handful of his co-workers showed up at his house and told him that his son Ike Jr. had been killed. He says that God started doing His work in his life from the first time he saw Takoya, the man who killed his son, he had nothing but love in his heart for him. So show the video.
You know, he goes off to prison, and wherever he ended up, I would always be mindful of him. I would always be, praying for him. A couple of years passed, and I'd write a letter, and I'd throw it away. I'd write a letter, throw it away. I'm wondering, hey, what do I say? Do he even want to hear from me? After I think about 3 years, I wrote him a letter, and I always let him know I was praying for him. Always started off with, I hope things are as well as they can be. I knew it was tough enough, just being in there. And so at the end of the letter, I said, I need a favor from you. I said, I miss my son, Ike Jr., and I said, I'd like you to fill in for him till we all get to heaven. And I said, if not, I understand. And so I hurry up and I mailed a letter, before I chickened out again, and not knowing what to expect. And it probably took about 3 weeks to a month. I get a letter back, and I'm actually riding the beat. And I got the letter, and it's sitting on the seat of the police car, and I'm scared to open it because I don't know what it's gonna say. I don't want to hear from you. Leave me alone. Curse me out. I don't know what to think. And I pulled over on the corner of Kings Road and Myrtle Avenue, and I opened that letter. And that letter said, "Dear Mr. Brown, I now know that God is real." It said, I told God that if you meant what you said, if you forgave me, if you really loved me, I told God that I wanted to hear from you. And I told God that if I heard from you, I would give my life to Him. Boy, I started crying. But they were tears of joy, And he wrote the most beautiful letter, you know. And at the end of the letter, he said, Mr. Brown, you asked me for a favor. You asked me, would I fill in for Ike Jr.? And he said, no way am I qualified. But if you have me, from this point on, you're my dad and I'm your son.
In 2009, he officially adopted Takoya as his son. We have to admit that most of the evil we see in this life is nowhere near as difficult as what we just saw. However, forgiving and giving a blessing to someone who has hurt us is still going to be very difficult. It's difficult not only mainly because of our pride and a sense of self-righteousness. And the only way to overcome our unwillingness to give a blessing in return for evil done to us is to focus on the cross and God's grace. The more we press into God's love and truth displayed through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus on the cross, the more we know we have to forgive, even when forgiveness is not deserved. We have to make the person who did us wrong the object of our prayers and the actions of grace. So how will I be blessed? That point 3. The question becomes, is it worth it? Is swallowing my pride and seeking to bless my enemy going to get me enough of a blessing to make it worth my while? We have to admit once again that question is very self-centered, but it's a battle that we face too often. We face a battle over pride and ego. We are proud of who we are and what we've accomplished. And we're mad at someone who has done something to take away some of the paradise that we enjoy. We feel entitled to hold on to a particular grudge. And whenever we do, we need to ask ourselves this question: do I want to be blessed by God? Well, we might wonder, what is the blessing? Maybe the blessing we receive is the blessing of peace with God, knowing that our actions are consistent with someone who has experienced God's grace. Maybe the blessing is having God's approval. Maybe the only blessing we receive is unexplainable peace and healing in the midst of very trying circumstances. But let's consider this possibility. If we cannot give grace to others who seek to mock or harm us, then perhaps it shows that we don't fully understand the truth of Romans 5:10, which declares that Christ died for us while we were his enemies. While we desired to live life on our own terms, we were God's enemies. We had no greater desire than to be the master of our own destiny, to do things our own way, and yet God forgave us, and he made us his beloved. Refusing to bless others who do us evil comes from a lack of humility that says we are better than they are. And to do what God tells us to do in this instance is extremely hard, and it takes a lot of trust in our Father. So why is Peter so confident that we will be blessed by God? He looked to the truth of Psalm 34 as inspiration. Psalm 34 was written by David when he was running for his life from Saul. Even when David had opportunity to seek revenge on Saul, he refused. David desired to live his life righteously no matter what. He would put his trust in God to deal with Saul. Peter quoted the words of David in verse 12, "The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right, and his ears open to their prayers. But the Lord turns his face against those who do evil." A commentator wrote, the eyes of the Lord was a common Old Testament phrase that relates to God's spatial, caring watchfulness over his people. Sometimes the phrase indicated God's judgmental watchfulness, but here the emphasis is on his omniscient awareness of every detail of a believer's life. He knows when we're doing things that honor him. We are God's people, and he cares about the decisions we make. On the other hand, the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. In contrast to the eyes of the Lord, which refers to God's watchfulness, the Old Testament concept of the face of the Lord refers to God's judgment. His eyes represent the all-seeing omniscience, whereas his face is representative of his anger and displeasure. God's wrath is against those who do evil, who disobey his word. In this world, we will have many challenges. How we deal with them will determine if we are blessed by God or not. Peter would have you to choose God's approval over God's wrath or disfavor. What will you choose? Let's pray. Dear God, today we are here and we have heard some very challenging words from the Bible. We have found that you would have us to treat others with kindness regardless of how they treat us. Even if they seek to do us harm, you would have us to bless them. And in so doing, it's making a statement that they cannot deny that we are different. We are people who have been changed by your grace. And we are people who are extending grace to other people. Not just people who deserve it, not just people we love and care for, but we are giving grace to people who may even seek to do us evil. For that is what you did for us. You gave us grace when we did not deserve it. And of course, that is the measure of grace. It is undeserved merit or favor. Dear God, here this morning there may be somebody here who has never placed their faith in you. They've never received your grace. They've never received your forgiveness. And maybe you're speaking to their hearts and they are hearing your whisper, your spirit speaking to theirs and telling them that they need to receive you. Though they might feel unworthy, you would welcome them with open arms. And I pray that as we sing this song, there's someone here who needs to receive your grace. I pray that you would help them to step forward and to come and to pray with me. Pray to receive your grace. And if there's somebody else here this morning who needs to come and pray over some other reason, Lord, help us to have your strength of character. Help us to have the humility that we need to make things right with you. We ask this in your name. Amen.